Hello and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. If you want to learn how to support this channel and its mission to normalize atheism and deconversion, stay tuned to the end of the video. Today I am continuing my series on morality without God, and I feel after getting rid of divine command theory, where we go next is a pretty good discussion. But in keeping with our analogy, to which sea do we set sail now that we've kind of left the divine command theory sea. But there is another question. Just because we get rid of any God in the equation, does that mean objective or universal morality is impossible? Without God, is universal morality still possible? How are we going to even set sail on our course in the first place unless we kind of answer some of these questions about what course to set? Now, before I begin, I want everybody to understand that I'm not making any really definitive statements at this point of morality. What you're getting in this series is kind of in many ways my own journey in analyzing some of these questions that I'm going to ask. And so I'm kind of just giving you where I am at the moment. So if you watch this at a later date, understand that I may have changed my mind by now if you continue on this series. But at the present time, this is kind of where I am on the question of morality without God, and so just remember that as you're watching the video. I'm not making any definitive statements. A lot of people on this question seem to get very emotionally invested, and I also want to avoid that as well. I'm going to ask, in this series, various hypothetical questions, because that's what a lot of moral philosophy does, is you have to ask hypotheticals to kind of ask some very hard questions at times. And I want everybody to understand that this is kind of us trying to analyze the question, not saying that certain actions are right or wrong or good or evil, so to speak. To get back to the question, is universal morality even possible without a God? Oddly enough, there are people who do not believe in God who say yes, that certain actions are always morally wrong, that in all cases, certain actions, they argue, are always harmful to people, always diminish well-being, and thus are always wrong. I recently had a person submit to me for an evaluation argument that sexual assault is objectively wrong, and always so. I'm not going to say sexual assault is a good thing, and I would not do that, but I have argued that subjectivity is inherently part of moral discussions, at least as I feel this at this point, as they involve value judgments, and value judgments always have subjectivity to them. But there also is basically no outside moral code that human beings look to or stands by itself outside of humanity as a standard to make that statement. Does morality even exist if human minds were not around to think about it? There are no cultural norms that are universal. In fact, cultural relativity kind of brings in this situation that certain moral questions are not bad if in a different culture, and different cultures have a different way of looking at certain actions as right or wrong. So the whole idea of cultural morality and subjectivity to decisions kind of counters this idea, and whether the nature of morality is inherently subjective becomes a problem for some of these people's saying these are always objectively. Now, I try to rack my brain about how to just argue this point or whatever, but I think an analogy or a moral quandary question is probably the best way to kind of approach this subject. I think it's the best way to illustrate that even what many consider to be always wrong objectively and universally wrong is to engage in a hypothetical where a person may have to choose between some of these actions and see if the idea of them always being wrong holds up and passes that test. Now, I want to overstate again, I'm not advocating for any of these actions. I think a good subjective case can be made beyond that's just your opinion, man, for each one of these choices being wrong or evil, if you will. I'm simply offering this as a mental exercise to chew on and refine our viewpoint on the issue. But the problem does arise when one has to weigh these actions between each other and make a choice. So here's my hypothetical. A man wakes up in a room with a table in the center. He finds a note left on the table explaining to him the situation and the decisions that he has to engage and make. He is told that a major city has a dirty thermonuclear bomb planted in its center, and that it puts him in the situation where this nuclear bomb will go off if he doesn't make certain choices about what are an action that is going to be presented to him. This will instantly kill hundreds of thousands of people and kill millions more through radiation sickness over the next few months, where people will die in suffering horrible, painful deaths. The man then is informed that this is the hypothetical situation, or in this case, a very real situation for him, in which he can stop this from happening. He's then informed that there's a 12-year-old girl in the next room that he can do one of two actions to, and this will stop this explosion from taking place. If he goes into that room and takes one of the following actions against her, it will end the explosion. It will not take place. The first of his choices, he can kill her by strangling her to death. The second choice is he can sexually assault her and leave her alive, but she will never know why it happened. If he does nothing, the bomb will indeed go off in 1 hour. And this is all ironclad, folks. I don't want all these other hypotheticals going off in different directions. The whole point is to engage the moral decision that the man has to make between these options. But then again, which should he choose? What does this say about the action, depending on what one he chooses, and in what sense does it now make it a good action that saves either millions of people from suffering an instant and long-term death, or maybe you chose not to do anything to the 12-year-old girl, in which case does allowing this massive death on a massive scale still do good to the 12-year-old girl? In other words, does the murder or sexual assault of a 12-year-old girl in some way become a good action that saves the lives of millions? Does this indicate that even in things that we think are very objectively wrong and violate our objective moral mores or rules that we create out of, I believe, subjectivity, could still be considered good if the situation is such that this is the situation? Does it say that then sexual assault or murder then could be considered good if it saves the millions of lives of people? That does kind of present a problem for the idea of these things being objectively wrong when we deal with value judgments. To me, the fact that we can make relative value judgments between these evil and, in a sense, one evil action that is chosen to give a good result and prevent suffering and death on a larger scale, does that not point to a subjective morality that is inherently present from which we can make moral decisions? A person with objective morality in this situation is going to have a problem that no matter what decision he makes, all of these decisions are objectively evil. If sexually assault is always objectively evil, then no, if he takes that option with a 12-year-old girl, he's still committed an objective evil, and there's no good that's going to come out of it. The second, if he murders her, same thing. If he decides to let the dirty bomb go off and not do anything to the 12-year-old girl, that's no better or worse than the other two actions that he could have made against her. There's really no way to make a judgment call or a value decision based on an objective moral standard. I think actually this kind of points to one of the weaknesses of objective morality, is that if you say something is always wrong and don't bother to think of a possible situation in which, well, it could do some good, I don't think you're really thinking through the decision very well. And I've engaged this hypothetical not because I think anything in it is good or the situation is good, but does that not change sometimes that sometimes what we consider objectively evil actions in certain situations actually can do some good while at the same time doing a smaller amount of evil to someone else? It's, to me, the subjective idea of relative value judgment that allows you to make decisions that minimize suffering and leads to the continued well-being of others, even though it might harm an individual or a small group of people, and that's the trade-off. But this is because I think we tend to fall into the trap of this false dichotomy of objective versus subjective morality in the first place, that there are only two choices that we have, or that subjective morality cannot lead to anything beyond opinion about actions, which I don't think is true. I think the real problem is twofold at this point. One, we assume that somehow subjective morality is inferior to objective, which I don't think has necessarily been established. I think objective universality has its strengths, but it also has its weaknesses. And the same is true for subjective morality. Sometimes it has its strengths and sometimes it has its weaknesses. I think its strength is the ability to make relative moral judgments based on the situation. Situational morality is a lot about what the situation is and what decision we should make in that situation. And subjective morality lives on that block and thus can make better decisions on it. Whereas somebody with an objective moral code that certain things are always evil, when they have to make a choice between those things that they're considered objectively evil, they suddenly are left with, it doesn't matter what decision I make because it's always going to be wrong. Whereas somebody with subjective morality can see that even a slightly evil action that leads to a lot of good might not necessarily be a bad choice if that's the only choice that they're given. Basically, I think at this point our problem is that, one, I think many people think that subjective morality is somehow inferior to objective morality inherently. And I don't know that that's actually been demonstrated to my mind yet, but I'll keep looking into it. At the same time, I don't think subjective morality is this one universal thing. I think there might be many schools of thought on subjective morality, or that subjective morality can have different origins. I haven't gone into the origin of morality yet because a lot of these schools of thought start with what they think the foundation of morality should be and what the origin of morality is. And I don't want to deal with that because we're kind of going to deal with multiple different things that different schools of thought think. And I want to wait until we get there to kind of look at that discussion. But it does leave us with a couple of questions. Is this objective versus subjective morality the only choice that we really have on moral discussions? And two, is there more than one form of subjective morality if we choose to embrace that side of it, which would allow us to understand that subjective morality is more than just our opinion, man? I think those are two questions that we need to ask and answer, but those are subjects for another video, probably next week's, so I'll leave that to there. In the meantime, I have to ask, what are your thoughts on this subject? Once again, I'm kind of still in flux about my own moral questions and answering and asking these questions, so this is more of a discussion starter than me making any definitive statements about morality. But, what are your thoughts on it? And what choice would you make in my hypothetical, and why? Do you still think that this points to an objective universal morality as possible, even though you're forced to make these decisions? I guess I'm interested in hearing in your comments what exactly is going on here, so I'll be anxiously awaiting all of that. In the meantime, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate every like, share, and subscribe. You guys are awesome. I appreciate every person that has just donated to this channel in recent days. It's been very overwhelming at times, so thank you very much. I appreciate that. Your continued support of my work is greatly appreciated. What is that work? To normalize atheism and deconversion, particularly to atheism, but deconversion in general. But the whole point being that people should not be looked down upon or mischaracterized because they're atheists or that they deconverted from a certain religion. And I guess I spent a lot of time fighting that kind of bigotry against atheists and people who deconvert to atheists, to being an atheist. And so that's my work. If you want to support that work, there's my PayPal link in the description. There's also super chat, super thanks to the channel. But most importantly, the option for membership is there before you for monthly support, which is greatly appreciated because it allows me to focus more on videos that target our mission and less on appeasing the YouTube algorithm. That just helps me, and it's also a good emotional support for your content creators, so thank you very much for all of that. And I just want to give a shout out to my members, to my citizens, to my Rabyd citizens, to my tribunes. You guys are awesome. Your continued support just is overwhelming, so thank you very much. I appreciate it. And as always, live your best life. You only get one go around and then it's over. So you want to take all your time, money, and opportunities and spend them on yourself and the people you love and care for, and to make this a better world. You'll be happier if you do. And don't waste them on the trappings of religion and faith, because that's a dead end. I speak from experience. And as always, thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you next time.